If you've spent years studying military history, you already know that war strips comfort down to bare necessity. Yet every so often you stumble across a piece of field equipment so brutally simple and effective that it forces you to rethink modern assumptions. This is one of those cases. Long before lightweight mummy bags, Gore-Tex bivvies and insulated pads, soldiers in World War II relied on a deceptively humble solution for cold nights, the military sleeping tube. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't luxurious, but it worked when it mattered most. And understanding why tells us a lot about wartime survival thinking that has been largely forgotten. Before we get technical, let me hook you properly. Picture a frontline infantryman in late 1943, Eastern Front or Ardennes, soaked, exhausted, caloric intake already stretched thin. Temperatures drop well below freezing. There is no tent, no stove, no guarantee of sleep. Failure to rest means slower reaction times, weaker discipline, and death by exposure before the enemy even appears. Under those conditions, militaries did not experiment for comfort. They adopted what worked immediately. The sleeping tube wasn't a luxury item. It was a physiological survival tool. And once you understand its design logic, you'll see why modern survivalists quietly rediscover the same principle under different names. Why World War II militaries abandoned traditional blankets for tube systems becomes obvious once you examine heat loss. Blankets, even when layered, tend to shift during sleep. They open up gaps, compress the insulation, and allow convective heat loss every time the sleeper moves. The tube solved this by, forcing the body into a controlled thermal envelope. German, Soviet and later Allied forces all adopted variations of the same idea, a cylindrical or semi-cylindrical sleeping enclosure that wrapped around the body rather than just resting on top of it. This meant the insulation moved with the soldier, not against him. How the World War II sleeping tube actually worked in the field is, honestly, often misunderstood. It wasn't just about warmth, it was also about moisture control and energy conservation. Most tubes were constructed from wool, felted fibres or quilted cotton, and sometimes paired with a water-resistant outer shell. Wool was chosen not because it was warm when dry, but because it still insulated when damp. Soldiers inevitably sweated, especially after marching or digging positions, and, moisture was unavoidable. The tube trapped a stable microclimate around the body, allowing moisture to dissipate slowly without stripping heat. This prevented the rapid chilling that killed thousands through hypothermia rather than combat wounds. Why the tube beat early sleeping bags comes down to compression and shape. Early sleeping bags were often too wide, poorly baffled, and easily flattened under body weight. The tube, by contrast, encouraged a semi-fetal sleeping position that minimized surface area exposure. Less exposed surface meant less radiant heat loss. In practice, soldiers reported waking up warmer in a thin tube than under multiple blankets. This was not anecdotal superstition. It was basic thermodynamics understood intuitively by quartermasters under pressure. How soldiers actually use these tubes during combat operations adds another layer of insight. They were rarely laid flat on the ground. Infantry manuals instructed troops to place spruce branches, straw, or even spare clothing beneath the tube to break ground conduction. Then the tube would be wrapped tightly around the body, sometimes with boots still on, sometimes with equipment kept inside to prevent freezing. This method conserved body heat, protected gear, and allowed faster mobilization under fire. If you've ever tried to pull frozen boots onto numb feet, you already understand why this mattered. What modern survivalists and historians can apply from this today is more practical than it sounds. The principle of wrapping insulation around the body instead of simply layering it on top still applies, even now. If you're, building a cold-weather sleep system from limited materials, think in terms of containment rather than just coverage. A wool blanket sewn or pinned into a tube will actually outperform the same blanket if it's just draped loosely. Even when using modern materials, a bivy-sack combined with minimal insulation really mimics the same World War II logic. The tube, you see, forces efficiency. There is also a lesson here about calorie conservation. You know, World War II studies showed that soldiers sleeping warmer required fewer calories to maintain their core temperature. In survival conditions where food intake is limited, this is absolutely critical. By reducing nocturnal heat loss, the tube indirectly increased combat endurance. For anyone studying historical logistics or planning long-term cold-weather fieldcraft, this connection between sleep systems and metabolic demand is, essential. Why this knowledge faded after the war is honestly largely cultural. Post-war armies had the luxury of weight allowances, synthetic insulation, and mass production. Comfort, in a sense, replaced necessity. Yet when modern explorers, minimalist survivalists, or even homeless populations improvise cold-weather sleep systems, they often rediscover the tube concept independently. History didn't lose the idea because it failed. It lost it because convenience made it, unnecessary. If you want to apply this knowledge practically, start by rethinking your current cold weather setup. Try experimenting with restricting dead air space. Enclose yourself more tightly, even just temporarily, and see how much less insulation you actually need. Study World War II field manuals, not for nostalgia, but for efficiency under pressure. These systems were refined through necessity, and frankly, necessity is the best teacher history has ever had. If this kind of deep, practical history is why you're here, make sure you subscribe to Iron Age Instincts. Go ahead and share this with someone who thinks modern gear invented survival. History still has lessons left to teach, and honestly, we're just getting started.